IP or, whatever it is, and then actually get some of this stuff done?
I actually think that one of the big problems that we have on policymaking is execution. Execution in Canada has been really, really bad at all levels, I would say. And I hope this moment of crisis forces us to see people start and governments start executing much better and stop with the short-term partisan politics, focus on these objectives, be consistent, stop changing budget teams every year, keep at it. Economic growth is something you build over time. Innovation is something you build over time. We don't have the luxury of having our eyes focused on the short-term political partisan stuff. This is the time, I called it the Sputnik moment for Canada, to be focused on the agency that we have to change things for good.
Daniel, what about you? We call it a Sputnik moment. Do you agree?
Yeah. I think we're faced with a significant threat, and it's not just what's happening south. The whole world is changing. Technology is changing, and it's changing at a rate that is really hard for a stable, slow Canada, which is what we've been. It's been part of our deal to adapt to. But we have to adapt. We can take this moment, and we can make hard choices and reorient ourselves, prioritize what's really important to grow together as a country.
All right, we tend to be the tortoise. We'll see if we can be the hare, because we might need to run pretty fast here. Thanks to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
That was Daniel Dubeau. He's a founding member of Build Canada and a former executive at Shopify. And Robert Asselin, the Vice President of Policy at the Business Council of Canada. That's all for the show. The Cost of Living is based in Calgary. The show is produced by Daniel Nerman, Blair Sanderson, and Jennifer Keane, with help from Jeff Kynock. I'm Paul Habersrud. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to CBC Radio 1. CBC, always here for Canada.
1942, Europe. Soldiers find a boy surviving alone in the woods. They make him a member of Hitler's army. But what no one would know for decades, he was Jewish. Could a story so unbelievable be true? I'm Dan Goldberg, and from CBC's Personally, Toy Soldier.
Available now on CBC Listen or wherever you get your podcasts.
We carry a world of information in our pockets because we want to know. It's news you can trust, delivered when you want and where you want on Canada's News app. Now with CBC Radio 1.
This is CBC News. Good afternoon. I'm Riley Lachuk in Winnipeg. At noon, it is minus 14 in Winnipeg this hour, a mostly cloudy sky. At the moment, we are looking at clouds building in as we get through the afternoon. Maybe a few flurries later on this evening. Our high in Winnipeg this afternoon, minus 5. Donald Trump is ratcheting up his trade war on Canada. The president says he is doubling the tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. The move is in response to Ontario's surcharge on the electricity it exports to some border states. Business reporter Anis Sadari has the details.
Sent on Canadian steel and aluminum. That's what Donald Trump is threatening as of tomorrow.
Americans are going to pay more.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford on CNN today reacting to Trump's announcement and pointing out U.S. companies will bear the brunt of these import taxes.
You know, there's going to be plants closed in the U.S. Assembly plants will shut down because they won't have the aluminum, or they'll be paying three times as much.
The U.S. economy needs more steel than it makes, according to Nathan Jansen, an economist with RBC in Toronto. And he says this will be expensive for both Canada and the United States.
Essentially, you're increasing costs in the manufacturing sector, not just in Canada, but also in the U.S.
One thing repeated by both economists and industry reps, it's difficult for them to plan investments at all when trade policy can change almost daily. Anis Sadari, CBC News, Calgary.
Canadian snowbirds could face legal headaches if they aren't properly registered with the U.S. government. A new rule introduced by executive order on January 20th requires all, quote, aliens who are in the U.S. for longer than 30 days to be registered. The electronic form will also require people to be fingerprinted. Winnipeg immigration lawyer Rhys Pactigan says this may have an impact on where snowbirds spend their winters.
There's a whole bunch of rules, and if you add another rule, it's not going to make it easier for people, and might discourage people to say, hey, you know what, just don't want to do this stuff all the time, and maybe I'll play, live, work, travel somewhere else.
Pactigan says if you don't comply with the rules and are in violation, it would be registered against your passport, which could cause challenges when crossing the border in the future. 6 people had to be rescued from a burning apartment building this morning on Redwood Avenue. Emergency crews arrived to smoke coming from the building in the 400 block of Redwood around 7:30. Firefighters pulled 6 people to safety through a window. In all, 8 people were assessed by paramedics. 3 were sent to hospital in unstable condition. Overseas, people in Moscow are sweeping debris from the streets after Ukraine launched what appears to be its largest drone attack yet on the capital. Russia's military says at least 3 people were killed in the overnight strike. The CBC's Anna Cunningham reports.
The Ukrainian attack is its boldest yet on Russia, aiming in and around Moscow. All 4 of Moscow's airports grounded flights and trains were also halted. The message from Kyiv this morning is that its overnight attacks on Russia should push President Vladimir Putin to accept an air ceasefire, something Ukraine has been calling for. And that will be part of planned talks today in Saudi Arabia between US officials, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio and President Donald Trump's National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. They will meet with Ukrainian diplomats and military representatives. President Volodymyr Zelensky is in Saudi Arabia. On Monday, he met with the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, but he says he will not attend the talks. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio is expected to meet Andriy Yermak, the Ukrainian president's top aide, ahead of the talks today in Jeddah. Anna Cunningham, CBC News, London.
Well, still with that meeting between US and Ukrainian officials, it comes as the relationship between the two countries is fractured following that dramatic meeting between US President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio is leading that delegation. Also at the table, the head of Ukraine's presidential office, Andriy Yermak, says Ukraine needs security guarantees from the United States.
Yes, of course, security guarantees. It's very important because we want that never this aggression never repeated in the future again.
Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky is not attending that meeting today. The International Criminal Court confirms it had issued an arrest warrant for former Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte. The former strongman is accused of murder as a crime against humanity. As President Duterte oversaw a deadly war on drugs that led to the deaths of thousands of people, he was arrested in Manila earlier today and is now on a plane bound for The Hague. And polls are open in Greenland, and for some voters, the stakes feel higher than ever.
I think this is one of the most important elections we've ever had, or that we'll vote in.
Donald Trump is a character right now that I think the fewest people in the world want to be involved with them.
U.S. President Donald Trump has made it clear that he wants to control Greenland. The self-governing region of Denmark is minerally rich and strategically important. And that is the CBC News from Winnipeg. I'll have more coming up on Radio Noon at 12:30. Taking a look at your weather forecast today, looking at increasing clouds in the city this afternoon. Our high -5 in Winnipeg. Overnight tonight, looking at -9. A good chance we'll see a few flurries in the city overnight. Light snow in Brandon, your high -5 this afternoon. -6 in Dauphin. Thompson, mainly sunny and -14 degrees on CBC Radio 1.
Good afternoon, Manitoba. You are listening to Radio Noon here on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg, 97.9 FM in Brandon, on the CBC Listen app and streaming on CBC Manitoba's YouTube channel. I'm Marjorie Dowhouse. Here's what's coming up on the show today during our call-in segment. Now that Mark Carney is the new Prime Minister designate, what's next in Canadian politics? Are we headed towards a spring election? Kelly Saunders from Brandon University will join me after 12:30 to take your questions and comments. At 12:15, it's a university history project that helped give a name to the nameless. We're going to hear more coming up. But first up here, reaction to U.S. President Donald Trump's threat issued just last hour to double steel and aluminum tariffs to 50% starting tomorrow. U.S. President Donald Trump just threatened to double the tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. In a social media post, he says the 50% tariff will come into force tomorrow. It's Trump's response to the surcharge Ontario put on its electricity export to the U.S. Justin Kopp is president of Brunswick Steel, located in Springfield. Hi, thank you for joining me, Justin.
Hi, Marjorie. Thanks for having me.
President Trump, as we heard, has now threatened a 50% tariff on Canadian steel and aluminum. What's your reaction to the latest development here?
Yeah, it's really like whack-a-mole these days. As soon as one issue seems to be dealt with, there's something else pops up, and it's shocking the amount that he's suggesting would go on overnight. But it's really, with this administration, just seems to be the way things are and trying to roll with the punches.
What do you think about Trump reacting to what Premier Ford had said about putting his own tariff on energy exports?
Yeah, I mean, right now there's a void in leadership at the federal level. So I think, Premier Ford is doing what he can to protect his people. And, but the realities are that if there really are steel tariffs being put on to 50%, I mean, companies have been planning for months now to adjust to for 25% tariffs, which are already extreme. To adjust overnight to 50% is, impossible in a short time frame like that.
Remind our listeners again, the product that you produce, and are you sending some of that product south of the border? Where does it go?
So we're a steel service center, so we buy steel in bulk from the producing mills, hold it in inventory, and ship to our customers, as needed, just in time. The products that we inventory and process, we ship to, like, our customer base is primarily in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. So we aren't ourselves shipping to the U.S., but our customers, for the lion's share, especially the manufacturers, are shipping across the border to the States.
How has this back and forth impacted your company? I mean, it seems like it changes every day. So how do you prepare? How do you plan for everything that's going on?
So the steel tariffs, we heard that there was, possibility of those steel tariffs being put in when Trump was elected. So we've been in the background shifting our supply chain as best as we can. In 2018, there were similar tariffs, the Section 232 tariffs that were in place. And we learned a lot of hard lessons during those times about how to switch supply chains and source from different vendors. So we've done a good job of preparing ourselves this time around. Last time, I think we were caught a little bit flat-footed, and we're as ready as we can be. Realities are there's some products that are made almost solely in the U.S., so they're difficult to find alternate vendors. We have in many cases, but there are some pinch points here and there.
So because of what happened in the past with tariffs, you feel that your company can handle this, can weather this storm?
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about, for the most part, when they're talking about a 25% tariff, most of the products are being sourced. There's choices of where to source them from. The issue becomes timing. We've been moving products to different vendors. Some traditional vendors in the U.S. might be a 6-week lead time. Now some of the other vendors that we've switched to are more like a 4 to 6 month lead time. So we've tried to bulk up our inventories in the short term to avoid any disruption. But, it is problematic for sure.
What do you want? I know that the government here is transitioning at the federal level, but what do you want to see happen? What does the steel industry need here to get through this?
Well, I think first of all, the Canadian government, it's hard to understand what the driving point is here for the Trump administration. You don't really know what the issue is that he's trying to address, which I think is the most frustrating part for everybody. So I think if there's supports for business, I mean, things like this cause layoffs. I mean, if there was across the board tariffs, that would be even more disruptive. So I think any supports for business, investment in companies are the kinds of things that business leaders need right now.
Justin, I really do appreciate you taking the time to join us on the show today and reacting to this.
Thanks, Marjorie.
Justin Kopp is president of Brunswick Steel, based in Springfield, Manitoba. Now, it's not just steel that's facing a tariff. Canadian pork is being slapped with a 25% tariff from China. This is in retaliation to Canada's tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, steel, and aluminum. How will this tariff, set to kick in on March 20th, impact this province's pork industry? Cam Dahl is the spokesperson for Manitoba Pork and joins me now. Hi, Cam. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity, Marjorie.
So, Cam, the pork industry, what's its reaction to these tariffs now from China?
Well, I think first off, I should observe the irony that the tariff on Chinese electric vehicles and steel and aluminum was put in place in solidarity with the United States. And so now we find ourselves caught between two of our largest trading partners. China is one of our most important markets from a Canadian perspective. We export about $500 million to China every year in pork. But it's more than just the volume and value of those exports. It's also a market that we ship product to that would be difficult to export somewhere else. So we can't just take a container that's bound for China and say, hey, we're going to ship it to Mexico. Because they're very different products. So this is going to have a substantial impact. If you add to that the threat of terrorists in our largest market from the United States, this is a very worrying time for Manitoba hog farmers.
And I was just going to ask you that, there's two countries now that we're involved in a trade war. What do you make of all of this back and forth between Canada and the U.S., Canada and China?
Well, we're really caught in the middle between two of our largest trading partners who are entering a trade war. And, this is going to have a significant impact in Manitoba. The pork sector here in the province employs 22,000 people and adds about $2.3 billion to our economy. So to see a significant disruption or even loss in some of our major export markets is not just going to impact the pork sector, it's going to impact every Manitoban.
What is it exactly that we send to China? And are there any other markets out there that we are possibly looking at? As you talked about, Cam, you just can't take a container that's meant for China and ship it somewhere else. But is there other markets that Manitoba Pork here is looking at sending those products to?
Yeah, that's something that we're always looking at is what are our ways to diversify our markets. But it's cuts that Canadians don't buy and Americans don't buy, things like heads that China will pay us a premium for that really don't have alternative markets. So it really is going to put the sector in Manitoba in a difficult position.
So what is being done now? The tariffs are set to kick in March 20th. What's happening between now and the 20th?
Well, as Justin noted, we really don't have a federal government at this point, and that's problematic. And I expect, along with many others, that we're very shortly going to be entering into a federal election. And now's the time when we really do need strong federal leadership. And, this is in retaliation for tariffs that were put in place to protect electric vehicles mostly. So how do we offset, the retaliation? Or how do we remove the cause of retaliation? Who's going to be negotiating with China? Those are key questions for us right now, and I'm not sure we have the answers.
Cam, I have to ask you because it feels like it's an emotional roller coaster, not just for all the industry players involved, but for all Canadians, about how there's a new development. It feels like almost every day in this. How is this news impacting you or other people that you work with in the pork industry personally?
Well, I think especially producers that are looking at, some of their key markets, and they don't know whether 6 weeks from now, what is the cost of accessing those markets? What are they going to get paid? Are they going to be able to cover the cost of production? Are they even going to be able to sell their products in 6 months? So it is an extremely stressful time on the farm. It really is. And I don't think that can be understated.
Cam, I really do appreciate you joining us today here on Radio Noon. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Cam Dahl is a spokesperson with Manitoba Pork. It is 12:17 now. That was Gord Downey singing about Chanie Wenjack, a 12-year-old who escaped his residential school back in 1966 and never made it home. But he's making an impact now in 2025. Stay tuned for that story. You are listening to Radio Noon on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg. It is 12:18, and yes, this is Radio Noon here. We're also streaming on the CBC Listen app and also on CBC Manitoba's YouTube channel. I'm Marjorie Dowhouse. Thank you so much for joining us. I just want to mention what's coming up here during our call-in segment after 12:30. Now that Mark Carney has been selected leader of the Federal Liberal Party and is now Prime Minister designate, what happens next? We're going to open up our lines and we're going to take your questions and comments. Kelly Saunders, political science professor from Brandon University, will join me after 12:30. Let's talk about your forecast today here in Winnipeg. We're looking at a mix of sun and cloud, -5, south wind, at times gusting to 30. Tonight, mainly cloudy. There is a good chance of flurries this evening and a low of -9. Tomorrow, back on the plus side, high of 3 degrees, clearing in the morning to a mix of sun and cloud by the afternoon. Thursday, cloudy with a slight chance of morning flurries, and then becoming a mix of sun and cloud by the afternoon, high of 6 degrees. 4 degrees cloudy on Friday. There is a slight chance of afternoon showers changing to snow overnight. Taking a look at current conditions right now, Brandon, light snow being reported there at -11, -24 in ice crystals in Churchill, cloudy and -12 right now in Dauphin. Flin Flon, mostly cloudy and -18. Thompson, drifting snow and -18, west-northwest wind gusting to 40. And in Winnipeg, at the Forks, it is -12 and cloudy. You might recognize the name Chanie Wenjack. Chanie Wenjack was an Anishinaabe boy from Martin Falls First Nation in northern Ontario. He was just 12 years old when he died after trying to escape his residential school. Since then, he's become a national symbol for the suffering endured by more than 150,000 Indigenous children forced to attend residential schools across Canada. But until now, he's never been recognized by the Canadian government as a person of historical significance until this year. Chanie Wenjack is now recognized as a person of historical significance, all because of a university history class assignment. That project was spearheaded by then Brandon University student Paige Meikle. We've got her on the line to talk about it now. Good afternoon. Welcome to the show, Paige.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So tell us about the assignment that led to this project.
Right. So the goal of the assignment was to take a look at the Government of Canada website and take a look at who had been designated the status of historical significance, either a person or a place or an event, and come up with someone or something that hadn't yet been assigned that designation and research about it and then formally nominate for the designation. And so in doing my research on the Government of Canada and Parks Canada website, I was really surprised to see that Chanie Wenjack wasn't yet granted that status. And so for me, it was a no-brainer to go ahead and do some more research for a paper and nominate him for this historical significance.
Tell us a little bit more about this designation. What does it mean to be a National Historic Person of Significance?
Right. Well, to me, it means that you had an impact on Canadian history or Canadian legacy, and your story is important and one that needs to be told. And in Chanie's case, it's a tragic story, and it's one that's quite upsetting, but it's an important story because it represents so much of what we don't know about residential schools and the victims of residential schools and what they had to go through and the lengths at which they were willing to go to escape.
And tell us a little bit more about Chanie's story himself for people who are not familiar with Chanie Wenjack.
Right. So Chanie was an Anishinaabe boy, and he was a victim of residential schools. So he was sent to Cecilia Jeffrey Residential School. And in 1966, when he was just 12 years old, he attempted to escape that school. And in his attempt to escape, he escaped in a really cold climate. He's only wearing a windbreaker. In his attempt to escape, he died due to exposure and hunger. And his impact, or the impact that has on people, is that he was so desperate to get out of such a horrible situation that he was willing to risk the extreme elements and all of these things that were facing him in order to make it back to his family and what he knew and where he came from.
In your research of Chanie, what did you learn? How did it have an impact on you?
I learned a lot about what the day-to-day to residential school in a residential school looks like, and the emphasis on forced assimilation and taking away any sort of Indigenous identity from all of these children. The punishments that they would receive if they didn't speak English, even if they didn't know the English language, and really stripping them of their identity and all they know.
Chanie Wenjack died in 1966, but he's been in the public eye for a long time. In 2016, Gord Downey of the Tragically Hip released an album based on his story. Why do you think it took so long for Chanie to be honored in this way?
Well, I think that's something we're still coming to terms with as Canadians, is the really unfortunate history of residential schools. It's an unfortunate history, and sometimes we have a tendency to look away from the tragedies of the past, and it's really uncomfortable to face such awful things that we as a country have done. So a lot of the time it's just easier to avoid and not address those things, but when we face them head on, we're able to bring awareness to what happened and how we can prevent that moving forward and the historical impact that had.
Paige, finally, I want to ask you, if there's something that people can take away from Chanie's story, what would you like it to be?
There's so many things that I think people can take away from Chanie's story, but I really do think his desperation to escape is so representative of how awful these places were. And, 1966 in the grand scheme of things was not that long ago. And so when we look at it through a lens of intergenerational trauma, we can understand better why we still see so many Indigenous folks impacted by the residential schools and how we have to work to unpack that and educate.
Paige, I really want to thank you for joining us today here on the show and talking about this with us. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
That was Paige Meikle. Her research project led to the Government of Canada recognizing Chanie Wenjack as a person of national significance. And now, Secret Path. It's a song by the tragically hip frontman Gord Downie and is one of 10 songs Wenjack's story inspired him to write.
Freezing rain and ice pellets, walking home, I'm covered in it, walking home, along the tracks, secret path. Did you say secret path? Pale blue doesn't do what they said it do. It's just a jacket. It's a windbreaker. It's not a jean jacket. They call it a windbreaker. Walking home along the tracks, secret path. He said secret path. I am soaked to the skin. There's never been a colder rain than this one I'm in.
That is Gord Downie with Secret Path. Still ahead here during our call-in segment on Radio Noon, now that Mark Carney is the new Prime Minister-designate, what's next in Canadian politics? Are we headed to a spring election? What does Canada do next in its trade war with the U.S.? Brandon University political science professor Kelly Saunders will join me after 12:30 to take your questions and listen to your comments. You're listening to Radio Noon here on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg, on the CBC Listen app, and streaming on CBC Manitoba's YouTube channel. I'm Marjorie Dowhouse. Stay with us. The CBC Local News is next.
This is CBC News. Good afternoon. I'm Riley Lechuk in Winnipeg. At 12:30, we are under a mainly cloudy sky now, looking at a mix of sun and clouds to the afternoon, maybe some flurries later on. Now we're looking at a high in Winnipeg today of -5. We begin with the latest tariff threats by U.S. President Donald Trump. In a social media post, the president threatening to double the tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum in response to Ontario's surcharge on electricity exports to the U.S. Ontario's Premier Doug Ford says he is not swayed by Trump's latest threat and says the surcharge stays until U.S. tariffs are removed.
Until President Trump gets rid of the tariffs 100%, we sit down on at the table, discuss a new USMCA deal.
Trump says the 50% tariff will come into force tomorrow. He says all of it can be avoided if Canada becomes the 51st state of the U.S. Those steel and aluminum tariffs may be the most immediate threat, but today in Texas, the focus is on an existing 10% tariff on Canadian oil and gas. Houston is hosting a conference known as the Super Bowl of Energy. Canadian business and political leaders are there trying to drum up investment for the oil and gas sector here. 6 people had to be rescued from a burning apartment building this morning on Redwood Avenue. Emergency crews arrived to smoke coming from the building in the 400 block of Redwood just after 7:30. 6 people were pulled to safety by firefighters through a window of that building. 8 people were assessed by paramedics. 3 were taken to hospital in unstable condition. Loblaw and its parent company, George Weston, have settled their involvement in a pair of class action lawsuits related to an alleged bread price fixing scheme. The $500 million settlement is still subject to court approval in Ontario and Quebec. The class action lawsuits allege the defendants across the industry conspired to fix the price of packaged bread in Canada. Canada Bread, Sobeys, Metro, Walmart, and Giant Tiger are the remaining defendants. Overseas, British authorities have arrested a man on suspicion of manslaughter. It is in connection to yesterday's fiery collision between 2 ships off the northeast English coast. One of the ships was an oil tanker that was carrying jet fuel for the U.S. military. The focus now has turned to containment of the fuel spill. Paddy Rogers is a maritime expert with the Greenwich Museum in London.
The ship can be towed somewhere that's safe, and when it's safe, it can offload the remaining jet fuel, and very importantly, offload the fuel that it uses for propulsion, the bunker fuel, because that's very dirty, and that would be a very serious pollutant if released into the sea.
And one of the crew members of the other vessel is still missing and presumed dead. And finally, soccer's Manchester United franchise has unveiled plans to build the biggest stadium in the United Kingdom. Part owner Jim Ratcliffe says they proposed 100,000-seater arena would be the world's greatest football stadium. Under the plans, the 20-time English champion says it will build next to its existing Old Trafford ground, meaning it won't need to relocate during construction. United did not say how much the stadium would cost or reveal a timeline for its completion. 100,000 seats, Marge.
That is very impressive. There are stadiums that big in the U.S. Michigan's Big House seats, I think, over 100,000 people.
Yeah.
Just impressive.
And you think our arena here, 15,000? 15,000 strong.
But you know what's great about it? It's a more intimate crowd, I'll say.
Exactly.
But we're loud.
We are. Oh,
yeah.
You know, I've been to some of those big stadiums over the years, and you feel like a teeny tiny little person. You can barely see the field from the upper seats, but that's what makes it special.
Yeah,
here.
you and the 99,999 other people in the stadium, right? So, Riley, you're doing double duty. You're also taking a look at the forecast. We're going to get to that in just a moment. But first, I just want to remind folks that our call-in segment is coming up here. We're talking about Canadian politics. Kelly Saunders, political science professor from Brandon University, will join me here. Numbers to call if you have a question, 204-7800-893, 204-7800-893, or you can text us at 204-588-7355, 204-588-7355. If you have questions about the developments that are happening on the federal level, just give us a call or send us a text. Okay, Riley, you're taking a look at the forecast. We're going to be back on the plus side, and then we're going to take another dip. Next week.
I was describing it yesterday as that weather doozy that's coming.
Oh, the weather, yes.
For the end of the week. I mean, a little bit more snow coming for some parts of Manitoba as we get through the day. Have already started to see that cloud cover start to fill in Winnipeg. I mean, a little peak of sunshine out there, mix of sun and clouds earlier, but we're starting to see that cloud cover building in. We are looking at a little bit of light snow into Westman this afternoon. Think around 4 or 5 o'clock for places like Virden, Melita, around the supper hour for places like Brandon, and later evening for Winnipeg. A fairly good chance really along the Trans-Canada Highway and south of seeing a few flurries late evening into the overnight hours, really tapering off as we get further east in the province. So really a slight chance of flurries for places like the White Shell down into Sprague, and into northwestern Ontario. Tomorrow, rinse and repeat, mix of sun and clouds. Cloud starts to build in later in the day for Wednesday once again as we get overnight into Thursday. Another chance of a few flurries, albeit slight, maybe some rain showers into the morning hours. And then we get into more of some accumulating snow in time for the weekend. Looking at maybe a dusting to a couple centimeters across southern Manitoba by the time we get to this time tomorrow. Looking at a high of -5 in Winnipeg today, -2s, -3s back to the west, and a sunnier -14 in Thompson, -16 in Gillam. +3 in Winnipeg tomorrow, +4s for Thursday, Friday. Then we start to get into that rain and snow. Our temperature at 4 degrees with some rain Friday afternoon drops to -14 overnight into Saturday morning. with some snow continuing through the day on Saturday, albeit light in nature, and then we're back into a sunny sky and -6 by the time we get to Sunday. So a little bit of everything coming by the time we get to the end of the week. Still looking at the exact track of the system and how much we can expect, but I would expect at least a little bit of rain and some snow as we get Friday into Saturday at this point.
Oh, it is going to be a messy one, isn't it?
We always get this late season
blast
of winter.
We do.
It always happens.
That's why you never put anything away just
Exactly.
yet. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. Thanks a lot, Riley.
welcome.
That is weather specialist Riley Lachuk, and also your newsreader today for CBC Local News. That is Riley Lachuk. Of course, Riley will have the very latest on the forecast coming up tonight on CBC Winnipeg News at 6 on CBC Television and streaming on CBC Gem. It is 12:37 now, and you're listening to Radio Noon here. I'm Marjorie Dowhouse. Well, a transition is underway in Ottawa. New Liberal leader Mark Carney is getting right down to business, meeting with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Liberal MPs at a caucus meeting. All of this change is happening as Canada faces trade wars with both the U.S. and China. And there is also talk of a spring election. To make sense of it all and to take your questions, Kelly Saunders joins me now on our call-in today. Kelly is a political science professor at Brandon University. So we're opening up our lines to you if you have any questions about what we can expect or not in the weeks and months to come. Here are the numbers to call. 204-7800-893, 204-7800-893, and you can text us at 204-588-7355, 204-588-7355. Let's welcome Kelly Saunders to Radio Noon. Good afternoon, Kelly. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, Marjorie. It's great to be here.
Mark Carney, as we know now, has been selected as leader of the Liberal Party. First of all, your reaction to Carney being tapped to lead the party with so much going on right now in Canada.
Yeah, you just put your finger on it. I mean, everyone was saying that he was the front runner. He certainly seemed to have a lot of the support of caucus and cabinet and within the Liberal Party. But to win by such an amazing margin, I thought it would be a little bit tighter, especially between him and Chrystia Freeland. But obviously, he's got a strong mandate from at least the Liberal Party.
Mm-hmm. What does that say? Because he won by 85%. Is that right? I mean, that is a big, big victory.
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, he won by even more percentage of the vote amongst Liberal Party members than Justin Trudeau did back in 2013. And we know how incredibly popular he was amongst his party members. So, yeah, this is a huge, huge win for him. But obviously, the real test is going to come in a federal election when he has to face Canadian voters.
Carney is also the Prime Minister designate. How do you think this transition is going to go between Trudeau and Carney?
Well, I think it's going to go smoothly. Certainly, I mean, Mark Carney was the person that Justin Trudeau tapped to be the Liberal Party's economic advisor last year. So it does appear that they have a close personal relationship. And so I'm sure they've had conversations leading up to Sunday night's vote about what a potential Mark Carney win would look like, what the transition could look like. And I know that they had a very lengthy meeting, Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney, yesterday to kind of lay out what the Liberal government's priorities are, what some of the pressure points are, obviously focusing on what's happening down south and the Tariff war. So I think it's going to be fairly seamless, but how quick everything is going to happen, that's going to be the real question.
Kelly, we have a caller on the line. Hi, Edward. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Glad to have you, or that you're having me. And I certainly agree with you that the election is going to be a very important one, and it's going to be very unlike necessarily what happened in the Liberal Party. However, the one thing that I think we need to understand is that Canadians all across Canada are horribly desperate as to what we want in our next government. And if Carney ends up holding a snap election, I think he will end up suffering an awful lot of big consequences, because many people will see that as just absolutely opportunistic.
Thank you so much for your comment, Edward. As we heard there, Kelly, Edward thinks that a snap election could result in a certain result for Mark Carney. What do you think of that?
Well, there's pros and cons to calling a snap election. On the one hand, the Liberal Party has seen a boost in the polls, and certainly with this leadership race. So to call a snap election in some ways might seem like it might favor the Liberals. But let's not forget that the Conservatives are still about 10 points ahead of the Liberals right now. And most pundits are saying that if there was an election right away, that the Conservatives would still likely win that. So there is a downside for the Liberals to going too quick. And also, a lot of Canadians don't know who Mark Carney is. So the longer that he waits, he's able to maybe build up his own image, have Canadians get a chance to get to know him and what his election platform and ideas might be. But then we're running up against the clock, right? Parliament is supposed to be called back by March 24th. We need stable government to deal with the tariff war. So there's so many moving parts right now that I really don't think anyone is really sitting in the prime seat right now. There's pros and cons on all sides of it.
We are speaking with Kelly Saunders, political science professor from Brandon University. How do you feel about Mark Carney as the new Liberal leader and Prime Minister designate? Do you think that he has what it takes to tackle all the issues that are going on right now? We want to hear from you. Give us your questions, your comments, 204-780-0893, 204-780-0893. You can also text us at 204-588-7355. 204-588-7355. Kelly, I want to ask you this because this is interesting times for Canada, our relationships with other countries around the world, in particular the United States. But what about the fact that Carney doesn't have a political background, has never held a seat or a political position? He was, as we know, governor of the Bank of Canada, Bank of England. How do you see that as having an impact on his role in the government and the party?
Yeah, I mean, that's really $1 million question and one that Canadians are really going to have to wrestle with. And again, there's no easy or clear answers, I think, on a lot of this. I mean, in some ways, not having political baggage, I think, is a good thing. Probably most Canadians are a little frustrated with politicians, and especially politicians that have been around, maybe a little bit past their due date. And so we're seeing a real resistance to that. And let's face it, this is not politics as usual, this moment that we're living in. So in some ways, I think being a bit of an outsider will help him. But on the other, this is not something you want to step into as an amateur, right? I mean, these are challenging times. Managing the economy, managing all the challenges Canada is facing, never mind what's happening with the United States right now. So is this really when we want to test out somebody new, given, just how important this moment is? So there's pros and cons on both sides. And as I said, it's really going to be up to the voters to kind of figure out who is best able to lead us through these challenging times right now, and what is the skill set of that leader that we're really ideally looking for.
Kelly, earlier on the show here on Radio Noon, we were talking, of course, about tariffs because it's in the headlines again today. President Trump threatening 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum, and China also slapping a 25% tariff on Canadian pork. When we talked to both, folks here on steel and pork, they had talked about transition in government, a new leader, the federal government in flux. And so questions about what steps they want next can't really be answered till we have someone in place. How do you think Mark Carney will fare when it comes to dealing with the United States?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, that's a bit of a wild card. There's no question that Mark Carney is extremely skilled in economics and understanding the ways in which markets work. I mean, he has a PhD in economics from Oxford. He's got tons of experience in terms of managing the Bank of Canada, managing the Bank of England through, recessions and Brexits. And he's also been Deputy Minister of Finance here in Canada. So he knows his stuff. But, there's a bit of a gap between being a policy expert and being to navigate, very challenging political waters. And so whether or not he's got the right character and personality and political savvy to be able to negotiate with some very challenging leaders like Donald Trump, I think that's the big question for a lot of Canadians. And again, hopefully we'll have a chance to see him a little bit in action before an election is called, so voters will have a little bit more sense of him as a politician and a political leader. But it all depends on when that election is going to be called.
We're asking listeners, viewers here on Radio Noon, maybe how do you feel about a possible spring election. What do you think of the timing? Are you ready for a federal election? What do you think the issues should be for a political campaign here? 204-780-0893, 204-780-0893. You can also text us 204-588-7355, 204-588-7355. We're speaking with Kelly Saunders, political science professor at Brandon University. So, Kelly, the big question is, and a lot of people are thinking about it, as you said, don't be too quick to call a federal election here. Maybe Carney needs a little bit of time, but when do you think this is going to happen? Because a lot of the talk is that we are going to see a spring election.
Yeah, I mean, I think the pressure is on to have an election. I mean, for a few reasons. Number one, we need stability in government and at the national level. And so, right now we've got a lot of chaos coming out from our southern neighbors about tariffs and so on and so forth. And so I think the markets and Canadians and business owners and workers need some stability. So I think there's pressure that way. And then also, too, don't forget that the clock is running out on prorogation. Right now, the House is set to come back March 24th. Now, I mean, Mark Carney, as our new Prime Minister, could go to the Governor General and request an extension. But sooner or later, we have to have Parliament back. We have to pass budgets. We've got to pass potentially, new legislation or new programs to help support workers and industries in Canada. So, I mean, we do need an election sooner rather than later. And then also, too, I think that the new Prime Minister will need democratic legitimacy. He needs to stand in front of the voters and get a mandate from them, not just Liberal Party members. So I think the pressure's on to get an election sooner rather than later for all those reasons.
Kelly, we have Brenda on the line. Hi, Brenda.
Hello.
What's your comment or question?
On the question of trust. I trust Carney to lead the country. I think he's eminently qualified, and whether he's been actually a politician or not, he certainly has navigated some serious waters filled with sharks in Brexit and the 2008 collapse. He was there for Canada and Britain in both of those. I do not trust Pierre Poilievre. His every meme has a lie at the core. He still refuses to get a security clearance, and I think that should be a much bigger issue in the media in Canada, especially in a crisis like this where we are actually headed into a serious conflict with our neighbor. If we don't know that we can trust him with our secrets, what can we trust him with?
Thank you so much, Brenda, for your comment. What does the Carney leadership mean, Kelly, for the other parties?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think your caller really put their finger on an important element that we look for in our leaders at all times, and we should look for, not just during moments of crisis, which is this issue of trust. And that's what it's going to come down to. Who best can deal with really the number one challenge, I think, and the number one issue for a lot of voters right now, which is who can best stand up for Canada, rally Canada, protect Canada in the face of the threats coming from the United States. Who do we trust to navigate us through these troubled waters? And again, how voters are gonna fall on that issue in terms of who is the best leader with that right combination, I think remains to be seen. But trust, no question, is a big issue. And and again, depending on how you feel about the three-party leaders, in terms of the NDP, the Conservatives, and the Liberals. That's going to come down to individual preferences, but no question, I think the relationship with the U.S., who can best deal with Trump, who do we trust the most to protect Canada, is going to be the, as we say, the ballot box issue in the next election.
Thank you so much for your call, Brenda. We are speaking with Kelly Saunders, political science professor from Brandon University. We're talking about federal politics here. Now that there's a new Liberal leader in place, what does this mean to you? We could be headed towards a spring election. How do you feel about a spring election? You can send us your comments. Text 204-588-7355, 204-588-7355. You can, of course, always call us at 204-780-0893, 204-780-0893. Kelly, it's going to be very interesting because, pollsters are getting ready to take a closer look at this. It's going to be interesting to see what the polls are going to look like here.
Yeah, absolutely. They've been bouncing like crazy, actually. I mean, a year ago, it looked like there was going to be a solid Conservative majority win and quite a large majority win for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party. Now here we are, a few months later, and things have really quite shifted. As I mentioned earlier, the Conservatives are still in the lead right now, but their lead has been cut pretty much in half, and continues to shrink. We're seeing a downward trend for the Conservative Party. And it looks like the Liberals have really been able to gain at the expense of the NDP. So there's a lot of movement happening there. So there's still some volatility happening. And how all that's going to unfold over the next few weeks, I think we're going to continue to see the polls quite volatile.
What are some of the big storylines that you're going to be following here, Kelly, as we see so much movement on so many fronts, new developments every day?
Yeah, it's to say that these are unprecedented times, I think, is the understatement of the year. There's so many happening things here right now. I mean, first of all, we've got to see how things unfold in Ottawa with Justin Trudeau stepping down and then Mark Carney being sworn in, picking a cabinet, deciding whether or not he's going to call Parliament back or call an election. He needs to have a seat in the House of Commons. So where is he going to position himself that way? Then, of course, all the challenges with the United States. One day tariffs are on, one day they're off. One day they're at 25%. The next day they've been bumped up to 50% from the American president. So just how all that plays out. What is Manitoba going to do? Are we going to, impose? Are we going to stop hydroelectric supplies flowing down to the United States like Ontario has done? So how we manage that issue, I think a lot has to kind of be settled. And then there's other issues, right, that are still facing Canadians. I mean, we are still dealing with some troubled economic times. We've got a housing crisis. We've got a healthcare crisis in this country. What are we going to do about the carbon tax? Mark Carney said he's going to stop it immediately. But what are we going to do on the environment front? So there's a whole host of challenges and problems that we are facing in this country. So how all that is going to tumble down, again, it's going to be some really interesting times moving forward.
We got a text message from Trevor Kelly. Trevor says nobody wants a Trump regime here with Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party of Canada. Trump getting in literally destroyed the PC Party of Canada for now. What do you make of that comment? It sounds like Trevor is saying that, we've got a more right-leaning regime in the United States and then the Conservatives here in Canada.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's going to be, a bit of an Achilles heel for Pierre Poilievre. And already you see him trying to walk back from that a little bit. I mean, I remember there was a poll that came out in October of Conservative Party supporters, and about half of them actually supported and endorsed President Trump. Now, whether or not that figure would hold today, given the fact that, all the chaos that Trump has caused for Canada. But, there are still some concerns that there are some members of the Conservative Party. There is a base within the party, or at least a segment within the party, that is, supportive of Trump and his style of politics, and even a bit of a movement we hear in some Western Canadian provinces to make Canada the 51st state, or at least some provinces like Alberta. So Pierre Poilievre has to really walk that fine line, and you see that he's been trying to distance himself from that, to say, look, I am not a Trump supporter, I'm not MAGA, and, and that is I stand for Canada. But that is certainly something that he's going to be vulnerable to, and that no question the Liberals and the NDP are really going to try to paint him with that same Trump-like brush.
Kelly, we have a message from Sharon. Sharon texted us, how will we see more of Mark Carney if he does not have a seat in Parliament? Can he in fact speak on behalf of the government?
Yeah, excellent question. I mean, as Prime Minister, he's Prime Minister designate right now, but once he's sworn in, and that should happen within the next couple of days or so, I mean, under Canadian constitutional law and convention, I mean, he is able to speak on behalf of the government of Canada, because right now we still have a Liberal government, and he's been elected or selected, at least by the Liberal membership, to be the leader of the Liberal Party, sworn in by the Governor General. But he doesn't have a Democratic mandate And I think that's what the caller's really speaking to. And that's where a lot of Canadians will say, hey, look, he didn't face us in a general election. He didn't earn our vote, or at least his party didn't earn our vote. And so that's where I think, again, he's going to have to face the electorate sooner rather than later to really, prove that he's won that democratic, legitimate mandate from the people. But again, when that's going to happen, it could be a few weeks from now. And in the meantime, he is going to be our prime minister.
Boy, there is a lot to look forward to and a lot to watch very closely, Kelly. Thank you so much for joining us today here on Radio Noon.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Kelly Saunders is a political science professor at Brandon University.
Are you a dancer in this world? Do you walk the sun dance of life? And all you wanted was to be free. What I wanted was to be me, and it's hard, but you said it, and you meant it, but would you keep on going? Sun dancer, carry the weight on your shoulders, on your shoulders. They say we're all the same in this world, like red is red and white is white.
That is Rhonda Head with Sundancer. 12:57. We're coming up to 12:58 now, and you're listening to Radio Noon here on CBC Radio 1. The host of Up to Speed, Faith Wendell, joins me now in studio with a look at what's coming up this afternoon. Hi, Faith.
Hey, Marjorie, we have lots of tariff talks continuing today to try and help folks navigate through what we've been hearing, the latest from U.S. President Donald Trump. Stay tuned for more on that and other things, including local music on the program. Stay tuned.
Thanks a lot, Faith.
You're welcome.
That is Faith Wendell, host of Up to Speed. Tune in on CBC Radio 1 starting at 3 o'clock. Well, thank you for joining us today here on Radio Noon. Thank you to our wonderful team. Our tech is Dylan Longhurst, director Sierra Sanders, producer Wendy Parker, our associate producer Carmen Ponto, YouTube live stream director is Travis Peterson. I'm Marjorie Dowhouse. Enjoy the rest of your day. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. And stay tuned here to CBC Radio 1 coming up next on Reserved. Have a good one.